Well, thank you for joining me today for this study of the book of Daniel. We're in chapter 7. We'll do verses 1 through 28. The whole chapter is the background, but we'll do fewer verses than that, I assure you. Now, I have to admit that I'm going to have to stay closer to my notes than I would normally stay, so I'll be looking down more, simply because this is one of those visions that is so complicated and it is so in detail. And if you leave out any of the detail, you're going to gerrymander the vision out of focus. And so I just have to look at my notes more than normal. Now, when Daniel comes to write, by the way, the last visions that Daniel will have is in chapters 7 through 12, and there's 4 of them. This is the first of the 4 visions, I believe, that he has. And he writes this vision down, he mulls over it, comes to think about it, and then he pretty well puts it on the shelf and leaves it there for a while. You know, things don't last a long time. Things change. Visions happen. Was reminded by some of the material that how temporary things are. And he mentioned one of the temporary things was no one ever dreamed that someone would break the 4-minute mile. And that happened. It happened, by the way, by Roger Bannister, who ran a mile in 4 or less minutes. And they thought it would never happen. And it happened in 1954, the year I graduated from high school. Now, that in itself was some kind of remembrance thing for me. But the thing that actually blew my mind is when he said, already there have been 500 American runners who have run the 4-minute mile. It was broken in 1954, and since that time, 500 American runners have broken the 4-minute mile. So nothing lasts forever but one thing. Jesus is coming again. And that's how this is going to end up eventually in this vision, is the coming of Jesus Christ. So look at chapter 7, beginning with verse 1. In the first year of King Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven strove upon the great sea. And the 4 great beasts, now listen, the 4 winds, the 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse from one another. All 4 different from each other, and you're going to see that difference. The first was like a lion that had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made to stand on its feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Now that's a lion who had wings that were plucked, and a man's heart was given to the lion. Now that's first part of the vision. You see why I need to look at my notes more. And behold, another beast, a second like unto a bear. It raised itself up on one side, had 3 ribs in its mouth. He's eating the ribs of something else, and between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. That's the second part of the vision, was the bear. The first was the lion, then the bear. Look at verse 6. Lo, another like a leopard, which had upon its back 4 wings of a fowl, and the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given it. After this, I saw in the night visions, behold, a 4th beast. Now we've seen the lion, the bear, and the leopard. Here's the 4th beast. Behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with its feet. It was diverse from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them one little horn, before whom there were the first horns plucked by the roots. Behold, in this horn were eyes, like the eyes of a man, a mouth speaking great things. Now, that's the vision. That's part of the vision that he sees. Now, please understand that I am going to tell you the interpretation through those who have studied the passage and have done all the background work. I am simply going to pass on to you their interpretation of this vision of Daniel. I cannot interpret it for myself. I cannot interpret it at all. And some of what I'm going to tell you has to be rather speculative in nature. This was Daniel's vision. It was not mine. It was not the other gospel commentators who are going to give materials on it. This is how Daniel saw it. So let me stay close to my notes and try to help you through understanding this vision of Daniel and what it means. Number 1, the lion had eagle's wings. These wings were removed, and it gave him a human mind. I already said that. Now, in this dream that he has, this first year in Belshazzar's life as the king, and recounting these last days, this dream and this vision, we have to try to understand what it's all about. This happened at night. It was a night vision. The 4 winds of heaven. The 4 winds means God's sovereignty. Now, that I'm very comfortable with. When you read about the 4 winds, God's sovereignty. And we see that expressed in Jesus Christ. I don't want to overcook it, but when Jesus walks on the water and says, "Peace, be still," he is sovereign over nature as well as over mankind. And he's going to become sovereign over all of the nations, as we'll see as we move on into this. My vision by night, these 4 winds of heaven, and these coming out of the great sea. Now this apparently would be the Mediterranean Sea, which be his first and best frame of reference. Daniel anticipated God revealing what was going to come. They were different. They were diverse, he says, from one another. Now this lion who had his wings pulled, David affirms that this first creature had lion-like qualities that had eagle's wings. Daniel continued watching. He saw the wings were being plucked, and he differed from a lion because he was lifted up from the earth, was made to stand on his feet like a man, and was put into him a man's heart. The idea that each beast is going to represent some nation. Now the lion, by all of the interpretation that I read, the lion is representative of Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. The lion, a powerful animal, and he was powerful. Nebuchadnezzar was powerful. He is the one that took down Jerusalem. He is the one that destroyed the temple. carried the captivities. That's how Daniel got into Babylonian captivity, was Nebuchadnezzar. He took the best of the best back with him, put them in a special 3-year training program, as you remember. And Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, all of them went through this training process, and all of them excelled. So this was like probably Nebuchadnezzar's. And the humbling was the taking away of the wings, clipping the wings. Now the second beast was like a bear. Now, everyone I read said that these 3 ribs in the mouth was the image of the ferociousness of the bear himself, and he arises to devour much flesh. And this is representative of the Persian Empire. So you have the Babylonians, then you have the Persians that come. And one interpreter said, and the 3 ribs were likely to be interpreted as the Babylon, Egypt, and Lydia, and the major conquest of the Persians. Now, stay with me, folks. This is a complicated thing. So we have the lion-like part of the vision. The lion stands on his hind feet. The wings are plucked, and he's given a man's heart. And then there is the second, like a bear, eats much flesh, conquering. These are the Persians, devouring people. And then there is a third that is like a leopard. Upon the back were 4 wings like a fowl, and he had dominion for a time, just as the other beasts had experienced. Most interpreters believe that this is the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great, and that the 4 heads are describing the 4 generals who divided his empire once he died. People should not place their ultimate trust in the rulers of the kingdoms, and we're going to see why in just a little while. Now let me just go through this again. I know this is redundant, and I don't know how else to do it but be redundant with it. Here is a lion, the likes of which you have never seen. Here is a bear, the likes of which you have never seen. Here is a leopard, the likes of which you have never seen. And the lion represents Babylon, and the beast represents Persia, and the leopard represents Greece, or the empire of Alexander the Great. Now, those are the first ones. There's still one more to come. And this is the one that we must understand more than the other 3, because this is crucial. Daniel had seen 3 of the beast. Now here's a 4th. After I saw the night vision, and behold, the 4th beast, dreadful and terrible. Now he doesn't give it a name, a lion or a leopard, whatever. Dreadful and terrible, strong exceedingly. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke things into pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet. And it was diverse from all the other beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked by the roots. Behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Now that's the vision. Let me do the best I can with it. This 4th beast with the iron teeth is in all likelihood the Roman Empire, who was vicious in their conquest. And so this 4th beast, the Roman Empire of the 2nd century BC, surpassed all other empires. Now, the Romans did some things. They built the roads and made commerce much easier. They had a common language, which was mostly Latin, and they also had a common economy. So they did a lot of good things, but they were vicious. But they were superior administrators, and that's what distinguished them from the others. Now, the others, if you remember Nebuchadnezzar, he became so puffed up with himself that he was turned into a beast. And now here is a beast being turned into a person in the lion. But nonetheless, this beast that he's talking about, whatever it is, it's like something you've never seen before. And he advocates that this beast, in all likelihood, or they advocate that this beast, in all likelihood, is the Roman Empire. Daniel considered the horns and another little horn. The best interpretation I could find of the little horn is this is the sign of the Antichrist. And we're going to see that come into focus, the sign of the Antichrist. So powerful was the 11th horn that the appearance of 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. This is the little horn is the Antichrist and will raise his voice against God and his people. Now, if you want reference on that, Antichrist raising his voice toward God and the people, look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, and Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 through 10, and you'll get the idea. These horns, the presence of human eyes, suggests being a significant, sighted, single earthly leader, his mouth speaking great things. Now, let me try to pull this together some so we can make some sense out of the vision of Daniel. I don't want to diminish the vision, but it is just that. And even Daniel lays it aside. He writes it all down so he won't forget it. Thank the Lord for that. But when this vision is completed, what has happened is here are the great kingdoms of the world, and they have passed from one to another over a period of many years. Now, what's going to happen is he's going to then bring the Antichrist, who speaks against the things of God and against his people and against his church. And the Antichrist, now distinguish between the two. There are many Antichrist, little a. There will be one Antichrist, big A. And it's this Antichrist, the big A, that he's talking about. And it's going to be finally destroyed. In the book of Revelation, we find the destruction that comes on this Antichrist and the beast as well. So here's the beast, here's the Antichrist, the little horn, and God puts leaders in position. But then I want you to know, if you miss this, you have missed my whole interpretation of this vision. This again is Daniel's way, or God's way through Daniel, I should say. This is God's way through Daniel's vision to let us know God is sovereign over the nations of the world. God is sovereign. Now, he'll put leaders in place, but God is sovereign. We may not understand it all. In fact, I can say honestly, I don't understand it all. That's why I trust God. I still believe that the world belongs to God and that he is still in control of his world. And he is going to bring his sovereignty to bear upon all of the nations of the world. And we're going to see that. In verses 9 and 10, he's going to talk, well, let's look at 9 through 14, and then we'll look at 9 and 10 by themselves. in chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. And I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit. That's the only place you find, I understand. That's the only place you'll find that way of describing God is the Ancient of Days, is here in Daniel, whose garment was white as snow, hair on his head like pure wool. His throne was like a fiery flame. His wheels were as a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. Now we come to the final analysis of the dream. The final analysis of the dream is God is going to take control of his world. Now, how he does this, he starts off by talking about the wisdom of God. Gray hair supposes wisdom. Now, folks, I don't know everything there is to know, but I guarantee you I know more than my son does. I understand more than he does. I've been through more than he's been through. I should be wiser than him. And it's an interesting thing that happens. Let me just chase this rabbit for a little while. It's an interesting thing that happens between parents and children. The older I get, the wiser I seem to them. There was a time they did not want my advice. In fact, there was a time that they despised my advice when I called them on the carpet. Now, I don't know how you handled your children. I handled mine up front. I didn't try to go through someone else. I didn't try to leave it up to someone else. If I had an issue with one of my children, I handled it. Not one time did Nancy ever say, "You wait till your daddy gets home." No. She handled the problem on the spot. She didn't wait for me to get there. Now, when I got there, I may learn about the problem and do something more about it. But I did not handle it. We handle the problems with our children when they arise, when they occurred. And that was the way we handled it. And so my kids all knew, hey, if I get in trouble with Dad, I'm in trouble with Mom. We're not going to be able to divide their loyalties. That's the way it's going to be. And so we simply hit it head on, face to face. As a result of that, they didn't like it. They didn't want my advice. They didn't want me telling them what to do. Listen, if I hadn't told them what to do, they would have been in the biggest mess that you have ever seen in the world. I don't know why young people sometimes think they know what to do with life. You have to live it some before you know what to do with it. Now, all of this to say, in the sovereignty of God, we must understand that God tells us how to live our life, and we are to live it as God tells us how to live it. Recently, Akiah Johnson, our youth minister, preached on a Sunday night in our church, and he talked about God's people ought to walk with God. He is so on target. You don't come to church and then leave church and walk like you want to in the world. You come for corporate worship and to get strength from the worship experience and strength from each other during the Bible study and all that goes on Sundays. And then you walk with God. You walk how He wants you to walk. So he's describing this God of wisdom, but he's also describing this God of judgment He does it in terms of fire. He is going to judge by fire. Daniel further testifies, a fiery stream issued and came forth from him. Now, this is not unusual. In the day of Moses, it was fire that consumed the sacrifice. It was fire that consumed Nadab and Abihu, two sons of Aaron, who offered the Lord's sacrifice in a way that God never prescribed sacrifice with fire. And so God burned them. Now, I don't understand. God doesn't have to explain to me why he does things. But I do know this, that he is a God of grace, and he is a God of glory, but he is also a God of judgment. And he is going to bring judgment upon the world, and that judgment is going to be with fire. Now, he gave us the rainbow to assure us that we would never have destruction of the world again by water. That's the sign of the rainbow. But at the same time, there is this fire. I am told that there is enough atomic power and hydrogen power stored in bombs in the world that would be enough to burn the world to a crisp in short order. Now, I don't know how God's going to take care of things, but I do. When I read the book of Revelation, I come away knowing God is a God of judgment. Now, let me just summarize for you. Here's this vision of Daniel: the lion, the bear, the leopard, and this other beast, whatever he is. He never calls him by name. And they are going to be overcome by God, who is going to take sovereign rule of his world through Jesus Christ. I don't have time to talk about the second coming of Christ, but if there's one thing I'm sure of, one thing I'm positive about, and one thing that gives me hope and glory, Jesus is coming again. And all of the nations of the world will bow down to him. And for at least 1,000 years upon the earth, at least 1,000 years upon the earth, there will be peace among men. Well, I hope you'll take this vision, go back and read it, assimilate it, but just know the one thing Daniel's vision tells us: the sovereignty of God will ultimately rule through Jesus Christ. Thank you for watching.